All right, welcome everybody to the retro for to 10.3 release. And so I think first on our agenda is Ben. Do you want to go ahead if you're here? If not, we can skip to Eric and then we can come back.
Thanks, Victor. Stan, maybe you can raise Ben or figure out what the status of his item is and cover that for us later. So what went well this month? I heard from multiple people that our release managers, Oswaldo and Tiago, did a really nice job under difficult circumstances, a difficult release. So thanks to both of you. And I think as a reminder, we now have two Tiagos. So this was Tiago B. Next, in general, the release was difficult, but the production team did use a new rollback strategy where they were rolling back, early and often and keeping a closer eye on metrics, and that seemed to limit customer impact. So I think that's a small win there, given the circumstances. Pingdom did measure 4 nines of availability. That's good, but I think there's some controversy about whether or not the monitoring that we have is really sufficient enough. So I think we're saying that we don't want to quite trust those numbers yet or celebrate them yet. If anything, we want to make that monitoring better in advance of the GCP migration, so that when it tells us we've got 3 or 4 nines, that we're confident that that's the case. Obviously, this is a complex problem, especially the difference between monitoring GitLab.com versus CI. Like, there's a lot of complexity there, but it is something that we want to make progress on. And then switching gears to what went wrong this month, I happen to put a lot of items in here. That's because as the release was going on, I kind of did a pre-retrospective just to kind of keep myself informed. As I talk, if there are people who are closer to these issues that want to correct me, by all means, kind of jump in, but I'll kind of lead for now. The first thing we noticed was that RC1 and RC2 were undeployable. RC3 was deployed at 9 a.m. on the 19th. I think a lot of people have brought up the point that we need to ship RCs more often. I think that's true. In this case, it would not have been the correct decision to ship RC1s and 2 because they were that problematic. So yes, we should ship earlier, but no, we should not have shipped RC1 and 2. That was a correct decision because they were problematic. But let's say going forward that the 13th or the 14th of the month is ideal, maybe even earlier if we enact some of the other suggestions for the first RC to be on staging, whatever the right number is. And then next, there were a variety of issues that came about due to database migrations. Some of them were the database team cleaning up debt. So I'm talking specifically about those ones, and they caused replication lag in both production and staging differently. So I think maybe what we could do here is manage that risk differently and thread them out, one at a time. Secondly, there was a misconfiguration of virtual PG bouncer names. This was something where I think maybe Jason Tevin, I'm not sure, traces back to something that was originally committed in August. This was a long-standing issue there. The load and the other issues that we had revealed it for the first time. Next, we had a performance regression from Prometheus, and I think this was a case a little bit different than what happened in the previous release. But in this case, there was a section of code that was merged. It was known to be problematic. There was also a hotfix, or a patch for it rather, and that patch was not merged. So the bad code went out rather than the bad code plus its patch. So sort of a release management issue in general there. And then next, from what I understand, the build artifacts, the dislocation of them changed in the CI/CD code base. That went out. I believe the problem here was that it wasn't tested on staging before it went out. It wasn't tested on staging because staging is not configured to be able to test this level of CI/CD issues. So it's more about the kind of, we don't have the testing environment we want for this, but then we decided to ship anyway. So I think two possible errors there. And then my last item is just that sort of a nit, but the regularly scheduled retrospective didn't happen last week. It was probably unrealistic and we should have moved it, but it was one of these sort of zombie meetings that I've mentioned. So next time, let's identify that either the meeting organizer isn't there to perform the YouTube stream or not enough critical mass of people are there to do it, and go ahead and just push it out a week in advance rather than let it be sort of a confusing experience for people. And then Tim, you've got the next item, multi-file editor.
Yeah, so the multi-file editor was restructured and refactored, and we added also on top of that a new data state and structure. So what happened is simply that this movement from inside the file repo into a complete new route and having it on a new route with all these 4 to 5 other merge requests at the same time going in one huge merge request simply had the problem that we were not able to get test screen. We had the problem that as soon as we had test screen, we already had merge conflicts again, especially on the 7th. Classic problems, if we have a huge change, we really need to find a way from our side to be able to really limit this down and have a strategy before that in place. The whole thing is now merged for 10.4. That's the nice thing. And from now on, we should be able to do all these things in very small iterative merge requests, what we are already doing. And we have way less dependencies now, and that helps a lot. Camille, you're next.
So last release, we worked very hard on multiple cluster support for EE edition, but like the way we choose to work on this feature, we actually spent 95% of our time on the CE, and we effectively missed one crucial feature, an ability to actually to define, and I mean, we not really define, an ability to change environment scope, which is the crucial for having this feature actually working. And we didn't actually catch that till like the last week before the release, which was like kind of crazy that it took us that long. But also with all the other problems with RC, even that we prepared the fix quite quickly, we didn't manage to merge this fix to make this feature working to the stable release due to all other issues that we had and the other pressure on the release managers, which kind of ended up in having the release, stable release, the one on the 22nd, not really have the feature working as intended, and it started working after the first patch release. It was kind of big disappointed that we actually had to do that we first figure out that late, but also that we only managed to fix that with the first patch release, because we actually didn't ship something in very good shape. What we can improve, Eric?
Yes, thanks, Camille. So the first thing I think is just more discipline about what is in the release. I think this is something that the production team has some eyes on, the build team has some eyes on, the release managers have some eyes on, but really we need more participation from the backend and front end teams themselves. The situation I'm specifically thinking of is that Prometheus patch that fixed a known problem and just didn't get into the release. I don't know that anybody else except for the team in question is well situated to really guarantee that gets in. So I don't want to pick on any one team. It's just an example, but I think the ask is for everybody to shepherd their work into the release and partner with the release managers to make sure that happens. The next suggestion is perhaps to do weekly RCs. So it means starting as early as the first of the month. I think on the surface, and this was a point that was brought up by Yorick, which is a good one, on the surface it feels like more work, but given the issues that we had in the past release, it probably nets out to less work because we're taking smaller bites, and to put it in GitLab ease, it's smaller iterations of RCs, and we probably find issues earlier and end up with a more consistent and relaxed release process. The next is perhaps the build team rotate as release managers. So we rotate today, which is good. You build up some tribal knowledge about how to do releases well. And then because our team is so large, we rotate those people off and that tribal knowledge is sort of lost. We don't want to put it on any one person, nor do we want to have anybody be a full-time release manager, but I think the suggestion is to rotate it within a team. So at least the tribal knowledge that we build up is located within a team. I think it's easier to share, easier to document, and not be so tribal knowledge-y anymore if we do that. And Marin, if you're on the call, maybe you want to speak up, because I think we chatted about this, and I think it's maybe not quite as easy as this, or maybe it is.
I think where we are lacking is the coordination, especially now we have multiple time zones, and we also have this short iteration of changing release managers every month. I kind of think that build team would be good to be responsible for at least part of it. So my suggestion right now would be have the build team own the release management for a while. Get one person from the build team to be dedicated over the period of, let's say, 2 months or 3 months, and then get one person from any of the backend teams or front-end teams to help out also in the same period, basically. So if we decide that someone from the build team is going to be there for 2 months, then one person from any of the backend or front-end teams should be there also for 2 months. So we can slowly build up more discipline, more knowledge there, and you can then easily know between 2 releases or 3 releases, depending on what we decide, to whom you should talk to about getting your change in. The reason why I'm suggesting getting more people in here is because if we are also under power, right? Like we also have a lot of things to work on, and if we are solely dedicated for this, we are going to miss all our goals, and you're going to depend less on us for the thing that you need. So this is my suggestion.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's reasonable, and I do want to remind people that, like, in some ways, we're just, we're looking ahead to the GCP migration project and having continuous delivery. So a lot of the things we're talking about doing are stopgap measures to get to that point. In which case, the collaboration I talked about between teams and production and release managers, that'll be native in a continuous delivery world. That'll have to happen. Your code won't ship. So this is in some ways good practice for that. And in some ways, the burden that we're talking about putting on the build team is somewhat temporary, where the ideal world after doing continuous delivery for a while is that it's almost self-service by the teams themselves. That's kind of like an end state. Okay, so this is maybe a good candidate for something that we take out of this as an action item, but let's move on and cover the other items. So the next one was, I think we had a number of at least 2 migrations that were cleaning up tech debt by the database team. So I think we just need that team to manage risk, maybe do 1 per release or 1 per release candidate if we're gonna do the more frequent release candidates. That might help there. I think I already covered this one. Prometheus actively managing their patches, getting into releases. This next one is important. I think we need to invest in the staging environment for CI/CD. I think this is good work going forward. As the production team is performing the GCP migration project, they're working on setting up pristine environments through automation. We want to make sure that now and also in that future state that those environments are sophisticated enough for the CI/CD team to be able to stress their environment with code changes. So I'd like to see some coordination there. I think this is maybe a good candidate as well. Next, I think in the case of CI/CD, this particular CI/CD change, this may have been something where we wanted to actually hold it out of the release and wait for better testing. So what I'd like to do in the future is, BJ is working on every release. He's seeing these things come through. If he finds one that he says, we just haven't tested this enough, it carries enough risk, where if we're putting it into production, we're basically doing it with a series of unknowns. He can escalate it to me and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it with the team. And I may choose to hold that back from the release rather than carry the risk for downtime. So it'll be a conversation, but just know that we're willing to take that step. We're not going to stop a release like it's the company's culture to release on the 22nd. The releases will move forward, but a specific feature set may not make it in if it just hasn't survived an appropriate level of testing. Stan, I think you got the next one, Postgres.
Sure, yeah. So we deployed stuff on staging, but we didn't have the same monitoring and alerting. So if I would try to go to the dashboards in Grafana for staging, it was empty. So that's one thing we could clearly improve, and it would have helped catch a lot of the migration issues that we saw in the RCs. The next one is basically along the same points of release managers deploy these migrations. They take a long time, but we have no visibility of which ones took longest and flag and ways to flag those that took a long time and review them later. So we have issues, and people have already, I think James has already added the merge request to show the deployment times, and so that we can just cut and paste the output. And then if there's one that takes more than 5 minutes, we can look at it and say, hey, that's clearly wrong. QA test, I think it's clear that we need a QA test for the GitHub importer, since some people, we use that quite often. People use that to move over to GitLab. And as a backstop, you know, if QA fails, we rely on Sentry to catch any issues. And the ask of everybody here is when the release candidate goes out, just look at Sentry every day, every morning to see if there's anything that sticks out. And there were a number of things that did stick out this release. And I can't be the only one doing it. Other people have to be doing it as well, because we could catch a lot of problems a lot faster if we solve these. This is, again, as a backstop. Everything else fails, Sentry is sort of our last resort, and we should use it. CJ.
Oh, yeah. This was actually handled already by Eric in what went wrong, I think. But yeah, basically, it was planned originally for the second Christmas Day, which is a national holiday, I guess, in many countries, at least historically Christian. So that was my point. Maybe we check the availability calendar. But either way, Eric already handled this. And then Oswaldo, I'm not sure if someone else wanted to take this point. If no one speaks up, I'll read up. I know that this would be a big process change, but deploying more often wouldn't make RCs and final releases more reliable. The current release process leads to a big pile of changes deployed on RC1, which now my text shifts. Where was I? Deployed on RC1, which usually leads to critical bugs, which generate hold patches, rollbacks, and delays. Is there an existing issue discussing the possibility of daily and weekly deploys? I think Eric just talked about this. Maybe you want to speak up again? And if not, oh yeah, I hear someone.
Yeah, I think I covered it over. I think Oswaldo is hitting on what we talked about, which is doing smaller, more frequent RCs to contain the risk and the changes is something that we're likely to take on. Probably, you know, I think maybe the ask will be if Marin is up for having the build team rotate, maybe he could put together that schedule and a plan to deliver the weekly RCs and take that into account. So maybe we'll roll those into one action item. And then Yorick, you've got the last one.
Thanks, Eric. So one of the things we could improve is when we schedule backup migrations, we include an interval. So we say, okay, batch 1 runs at minute 0, batch 2 runs at minute 10, 20, 30, etc. The problem is that if those jobs are, for whatever reason, they're tried, or the jobs get paused for a while, they can all still end up being executed at the same time period, which, depending on the work they do, can cause high database load, like we saw earlier today. One potential idea, I have no idea how difficult this would be to implement, is that when we take a background job, regardless of the scheduling interval, after we execute it, we ensure that that particular process doesn't pick up any jobs for, let's say, another 10 minutes. You can take it a step further and say that all processes won't do that, but then we could only do one job per 10 minutes, which I think is a little bit too extreme. Or maybe you want to scope it per migration class. Either way, when we pick up jobs, we somehow should make sure that there's a throttling basically going on.
Yorick, how about thinking about something different that takes into account the system usage? Like one problem that we had with the background migrations is that it generated big replication lag. So maybe saying that we run as many migration as long as we can keep a replication lag in like same state and like CPU usage of database system in the same state. And this is maybe the way how we model, because right now we just schedule in intervals, and it's kind of doesn't scale if we have like to schedule 20 millions, because this interval would have to be like very short and would still lead to the problem. But also when we have GitLab running through the day, we have the times where we can actually effectively run way more data, way more migrations, because the system usage is much lower. So maybe we could basically abuse that by actually reacting to how the system is behaving after running migrations.
It's something I've been thinking about with some migration helpers. The tricky thing is, well, for one, it will be PostgreSQL only, but I'm perfectly fine with that because, in my own words, screw MySQL. And the interval would still be sufficient enough for that. The tricky thing is that replication lag is I'm not sure if you can measure it by just using the primary. I think you can get it if you use replication still. So, but how accurate it will be, I don't know. Another tricky thing there is that the statistics you query from the database, they might not necessarily be directly correlated to what the work is that you're doing. And so you can do it. It definitely sounds interesting, but it will be tricky to implement. And you could have cases where you start your work, you see, okay, we have no load. So you do a whole bunch of work, and then suddenly the statistics, they get updated or whatever, and you see, oh, we have high load. All right, let's stop doing our work. At that point, you might have already caused unnecessary high load for a couple of minutes. So it's a tricky thing. I don't think there's a simple solution, but I think eventually what we would probably end up with is something where we force an interval regardless, like just a minimum of, say, 2 minutes per job. And then we could probably build on top of that and say, oh, if we're doing background migrations, but our replication lag is above X seconds, then we wait twice that amount of time, for example, for it to settle, something like that. But it's definitely something we should consider.
Okay, thanks, Jörg. I think there's a rat hole we could go down here, so I want to make sure we use the rest of the time for the rest of our agenda, but I think you're on the right track. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure we have time for two things. One is, I saw Ben's on the call now, so I want to circle back to the action item from the previous retrospective and then nominate a champion for the action items out of this retrospective. So Ben, do you want to talk about getting metrics turned back on in production?
Yep. So basically, we got all of the fixes we wanted in to 10.3. We tested it over time over the last couple of weeks, and I'm just waiting for the production team to re-enable it this week. Okay,
I think the delay has been the production team is rolling the Azure fleet due to a bug in their hypervisor, so that's delayed some of the things they were, but they'll jump on that as soon as that's done. They have a hard deadline of the 10th to make sure that's completed. Thanks, yeah. That's great news though.
Yep.
Okay, so then we've got, I highlighted 3 good candidates to be major action items out of this retrospective. Jörg, I think yours is a good one. It's sort of multifaceted, and you already picked up an action item in the infrastructure meeting this morning to kind of like think about what our ideal migration tool is. So I think I would not nominate this one because one, you're already working on it, and 2, we don't quite know what the answer is. Like, I think you have to scope that out, and then we need to look at the effort and maybe do a couple of iterations on it. So I think you're already working on that one, but let's not highlight this one now because it's not definite. And then that remains 2. One is a process one and one is a technical one. So I think we've done this champion process a couple of times now, and people have done a good job on delivering it. So I think we're graduating to the point where we can take on 2 rather than 1. So why don't we do both of the remaining ones? So Maren, if you could basically take on this process change around having your team focus on being the release managers, schedule members from other teams to cooperate with them, documenting the tribal knowledge that's been building up, taking Sid's comments here into account regarding the CE-DE merge, and basically, kind of retooling our process here. I think that's a great one. And then Camille, maybe you could take the second one and organize some effort and partner with, I'm not sure if it's build or production or whomever, to basically upgrade our staging environment for your code base to make sure that you've got an appropriate testing platform. Does that sound doable, or is that too open-ended?
I mean, like we could think about like the baseline of what we want to test and think about the plan for gradually extending the testing of staging for the CI. So maybe part of doing that partially as part of the QA would be the good candidate. Okay,
awesome. All right, so Maren, are you bought into iterating on a release management process?
So given that it's 3rd of January already, does that mean I can pull some of the decisions we made for our milestone in January? If I'm to achieve this, I need to actually get something out of the queue. So if this is top priority, then I can definitely move on that in that fashion.
Yeah, I guess the alternative would be you spend this release designing a process and roll it out the next one. But I feel like we know what we need to do. I'd rather do the first iteration now, even if we're already a little bit underway, and they get better at it for the second one rather than waiting 30-ish days. So I think this is a high priority.
Okay, cool. I'll do with what we have right now. We already have release managers for the next iteration, so I'll just work with what we have.
Okay, great. All right, so Camille and Maren are our champions for CI/CD improved testing environment and release management process, respectively. Thanks, guys. Anything else from anybody? Anybody want to chime in? Victor, anything to wrap it up?
I think Ben might be on now to talk about the previous improvement task.
He just covered that over.
Okay,
we got that. Yeah. So the update from him was that they've got it basically ready. They're waiting on the production team to get it activated. The production team is currently rolling our Azure fleet due to a hypervisor bug. So they'll pick it up when they're done. But I'll make sure that connection's made. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.